This video is for Calvin University international students who are applying for OPT. I'm going to walk you through the process to apply for OPT and show you how to fill out the forms and go through a few of the rules that are related to it. So first, the application process. There's really two steps to it. The first step is to fill out the forms that Calvin needs in order for us to issue an I-20 with an OPT recommendation. And then the second step, once you get that new I-20 with the OPT recommendation, is to send it to USCIS along with the rest of your application materials. So to get started on the Calvin I-20, there are 3 forms that you need to fill out. If you just search on Calvin's website OPT, then it should take you to this page here. So on this page, there is some good information about OPT that you can read if you're interested. Otherwise, just scroll down to the bottom and open up these 3 files, the OPT application procedure page, the OPT regulations agreement, and the graduation verification. We're going to start with the graduation verification. This one is the easiest form for you to fill out, but it's also the one that you should do first because you will need to get a response from the Center for Student Success. So all that you have to do on this page is put your student ID number here and your full name here, and then give it to the registrar. You can bring them a paper copy up in the Center for Student Success in the Schoolhof Center, or you can scan it and email it to them. They will fill out this bottom part confirming that you're going to graduate, and then they will return it to you. The next form that you need to fill out to get your I-20 from Calvin with an OPT recommendation is this. This is the checklist. So answer these questions: how many times have you been authorized for CPT, your cell phone number. This needs to be a number where we can reach you after you graduate from Calvin. Since Calvin is going to continue holding your SCIS record, we need to be able to contact you in case the government ever has questions for us, or if there's some kind of urgent matter that we need to contact you about, we have to have your cell phone number there. So be sure to write one down where we can reach you after you graduate. Next, please put in an email address. This one is really important because this address is where the government will send your link to the SEVP portal, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But make sure that this is not your Calvin email address because you will lose access to your Calvin email address after you graduate. So this should be an address that you check frequently because you might get important information there or important questions that you have to respond urgently to. The other thing is be sure to write very clearly here so that I can read it, because if I misread what you write and put in the wrong address, then you won't be getting the emails sent to the right place. Then here, choose your OPT start date. You do have to have one of these written in order to request your I-20. So if you're not sure what to put for this, you can check the section of the video later that talks about OPT start dates. And then after that, if you still aren't sure when to put your start dates, then you can contact me and we can talk about it. Once you've filled those parts out, then be sure to read this and sign at the bottom and write the date. Signature does mean writing it by hand, so don't just type your name in here. Even if you're typing it in a cursive font, that does not count as a signature. So you do need to print this form and then sign it. The last form that you'll need to fill out in order to get your I-20 with an OPT recommendation is the OPT regulations agreement. You'll also want to keep a copy of this form for while you're on OPT, or you can access it on our website, because this tells you everything you need to know about reporting and regulations while you're actually on OPT. So it tells you about the SEVP portal, it tells you about the reporting that you have to do in the portal. So when certain things change, such as the city where your job is performed, or if you change your legal name, or if you change jobs, you have to report those in the SEVP portal. And then you have to contact me to get a new I-20. Other things, if they change, you still have to update the portal, but you don't need a new I-20, so those are listed here. So this is good information for while you're on OPT. This also talks about unemployment, what to do if you're traveling internationally on OPT, and optional documentation that you could request from your employer. Then lastly, you need to sign the student attestation here. And again, be sure to print it and sign it. Typed signatures will not be accepted. So once you've filled out those 3 forms, then you send them to the immigration coordinator, and you can send those digitally through email, or you can bring them in person to my office, and I will get you the I-20 with the OPT recommendation. Once you've completed those steps, you're ready to go on to the next step. So we've finished all of this in this first big heading, 1, 2, 3. You've completed those forms, you've submitted them. Now you have your I-20. So now you're ready to go on to part 2 of the application, which is sending your I-20 along with all of the other required documents to USCIS. So the things that you need are all listed here, 1 through 8. At this point, you need to decide whether you're going to send your application to USCIS online or whether you're going to mail in a paper application. The speed of approval for both of these is about the same. Neither one is going to get you approved faster, so make the decision based on which format you're more comfortable with. The other significant difference between the 2 formats is the method of payment. So if you're applying online, you do need a credit card or a debit card to make the payment, but there's no need to mail paper documents. If you apply by mail, you'll be sending physical copies of all of the documents, and you will also need to use a check or a money order to make the payment. That's the real difference. They both require the same documents. It's just a matter of whether you're uploading them digitally or whether you're sending them in by paper. If you do apply online, it's still a good idea to do your I-765 separately so that you can get it checked if you would like. You can also check it yourself in that case. That way, when you log into the USCIS account, you'll be able to just answer the questions right away without having to think about them or without having to research how to answer them. This is page 1 of the I-765. This section at the top you can leave completely blank. This is just for USCIS to use, so don't write anything in any of these boxes. Where you will start is here at part 1, checkbox 1A for initial permission to accept employment. On this, the whole form, the I-765, you can fill it out digitally as a digital PDF and then print it when you're done, or you can print it and fill it out by hand. If you're filling it out by hand, make sure that you write very clearly and think about any letters or numbers that may be written differently in your home country compared to the US. Try to write those with the US usage. You should also make sure that all of your letters and numbers are completely inside the boxes. These will be read by machines, so the clearer you can write them, the better. So checkbox 1A, initial permission to accept employment. Then go down to part 2, information about you. Fill out your family name, given name, and middle name. Fill these out exactly how they appear on your I-20. So regardless of whether you have more names or fewer names than what show up on your I-20, fill it out exactly like it does on your I-20. Most students can leave this section blank of other names used. Even if you have an American name that isn't one of your legal names, you don't need to put your American name on there unless you've ever used that American name for legal purposes. Now on to page 2 of the I-765. This is your US mailing address, and you should think about an address that you can use at least 5 months from now. So if you'll be living in the same location 5 months in the future, you can use the place where you will be living. However, if you don't know where you're going to live, you should think of a friend or a community member who you know and trust, and you should ask them if you can use their address. If you do use the address of someone else, you should write that person's name in this in care of box. Don't write your own name there, because it's not necessary if it's your own name and it's a place that you're going to live. Then fill this all out carefully. After that is your US physical address. This is the address where you live right now. So regardless of where you're living in the future, this is where you live right now. If the addresses in this section and this section are the same, then you can check the yes box here and you can leave this blank. If these are different, then you check the no box and fill out this section. The vast majority of Calvin students are going to leave number 8 and 9 blank. If you don't know what these are, then you don't have them. If for some reason you did apply for an immigration benefit in the past and you happen to know your alien registration number or your USCIS online account number, you can fill those out. But if you don't know what those are, then leave them blank because you probably don't have them. And again, most Calvin students will not have those. Then fill out 10, 11, 12. 13A asks about Social Security cards. If you've ever received a Social Security card, then check yes for this box, even if you've lost that card. For 13B, you'll want to provide your Social Security number, and there is 1 square for each digit of the number. So be sure to pay attention to the lines dividing the squares and write 1 digit per square. For 14, if you've received a Social Security card in the past, then you should check no on this. And if you check no, you can leave 15, 16, and 17 blank. If you have never received a Social Security card, then you can check yes. If you have received a Social Security card but you lost it, I would still recommend checking no on this and then applying to the Social Security Administration directly for a replacement card. If you need help with that process, contact the immigration coordinator and you can get your replacement card that way. 18A, just follow the directions there. If you're a citizen of more than 2 countries, which is rare but could happen, then you can use page 7 to supply additional information about your citizenship. This is page 3 of the I-765. The section is pretty straightforward. It's just asking about your place of birth, so fill all of those out. Remember that your date of birth, it needs to be month, month, date, date, and then 4-digit year. So if you were born on January 15 of the year 2001, it would be 0115-2001. Next is information from your I-94. We showed you earlier in the video how to access your I-94, but just look on the I-94 and put the departure record number there. Then the passport number of your most recent passport. 21C, most students will leave this blank. If you don't know what your travel document is, then you don't have one. The majority of students will not have a travel document and will leave 21C blank. 21D, the country that issued your passport, and then the expiration date in 21E, again, month, day, year. The date of your last arrival to the United States should be taken from your I-94, again, month, date, year. The place of your last arrival, this should be the city or the name of the airport that you landed at. And when it says your arrival, it means the first arrival into the United States. So if you flew into the Grand Rapids airport, but you came to Chicago first, so for example, if you flew from Abuja to Chicago and then from Chicago to Grand Rapids, you would put Chicago here because it's the first place that you entered the United States. Again, you should look on your I-94 to see what is listed there in case you don't remember. 24 asks about the immigration status at your last arrival. So most of you are going to put F1 student here. The only time when you would do something different is if you applied for a change of status from inside the US. So if you were an F2 student and you applied for a change of status to F1 and you haven't departed the US since gaining F1 status, then you would put F2 status here. But most of you are going to put F1 status. Even if you did a change of status from inside the US, you would still put F1 status if you have gone outside the US and come back since getting F1 status. Then here, for your current immigration status, everyone will put F1 student. For 26, look at your I-20 and find the long number at the top that starts with the letter N, and then write in the rest of the numbers there for your SIVIS number. Then in 27, for your eligibility category, you're going to write C3B, just like it says on the checklist. So you'll write C here, the number 3, the letter B. Even if you plan to apply for the STEM extension later, you still need to write C3B here. Do not write C3C, just C3B. And then even if you plan to apply for the STEM extension later, you need to leave 28, 28A, and 28B, 28C. Leave all of these blank. You are not applying for the STEM extension now, and you shouldn't provide any information about the STEM extension. You'll apply for the STEM extension separately later on, in the last 4 or 5 months of your current OPT. Then leave 30, 30A, 30B, and 30C blank. You can read those through. If you think that any of those apply to you, then contact the immigration coordinator, but for almost all of our students, those will not apply. This is page 4 of the I-765. You're going to leave 30, all of this blank, and then 31A and B, leave those blank as well. Then come over to the applicant statement, and you should be checking box 1A, confirming that you can read and understand English, that you've read this application, and that you have been the one answering the questions. Then fill in your contact information in 3, 4, 5, leave 6 blank. This is page 5 of the I-765. This part, if you're filling it out digitally, you can fill out the date digitally, but you'll need to add your signature by hand or using a PDF signature. It's generally best to just print it off and then sign by hand. When you sign in box 7A, make sure your signature is entirely inside the box. The reason is that they're going to scan the signature and they're going to print it on your EAD. So if the signature is even slightly outside the box, they might reject your application. Leave 1A, 1B, and 2 blank, and then also leave the rest of page 5 blank. Page 6 of the I-765 can be left completely blank. You don't need to fill out anything on page 6. Page 7 in many cases can be left blank, but if you've done any CPT, then you'll want to fill that out here on page 7. The best way to do it is to write on one of these lines here. For each time that you were authorized for CPT, you can write full-time or part-time. So for example, full-time CPT from, and then put your start date to end date. For example, full-time CPT from June 6, 2019 until August 1, 2019. Each time that you were authorized for CPT, you can put it on a different line. So if you had multiple CPT authorizations, just use one line for each. The other thing you might want to put on page 7 is if you've ever studied in F1 status under a different SIVIS ID number. This only happens if you took a break from your time at Calvin. Then you can write previously studied under SIVIS ID, and then write out your SIVIS ID from your old I-20. Next, the 2 passport photos. These are really straightforward. You can go to the AV department in the basement of Hemingo Hall, and they're able to take those for you, I believe maybe for a $7 fee or something roughly that much. Or you could go to any pharmacy. As long as you ask for passport photos, they will know exactly what to do. So you don't need to look up the dimensions or the size of these photos in advance. As long as you ask for passport photos, they will get you exactly what you need. Next, the two passport photos. These are really straightforward. You can go to the AV department in the basement of Hemingo Hall, and they're able to take those for you, I believe maybe for a $7 fee or something roughly that much. Or you could go to any pharmacy. As long as you ask for passport photos, they will know exactly what to do. So you don't need to look up the dimensions or the size of these photos in advance. As long as you ask for passport photos, they will get you exactly what you need. Next, you have to send a check written to U.S. Department of Homeland Security for $410. You could also send a money order. Sometimes money orders are a good idea because then you don't have to worry about overdrawing your account. If you write a check for $410, you have to make sure that you keep at least that much money in your account until they cash the check. Because if you have less than that, then the check will bounce and your application will be rejected, and you might be able to send it again if it's rejected in time, but if it's rejected near the end of your application window, then you will not be able to apply again. So if you write a check, make sure that you keep that $410 in your account. If you send a money order, then you pay for that in advance, and it's just fine and you don't have to worry about that. This $410 amount is, as of right now, it is January of 2022. If this changes, then we will send you a notice. And you can also check on the USCIS website to see if there have been any changes, but we'll make sure to announce it to you if this changes. This is an example of how to write a check if you choose to do this instead of a money order. So the important parts are you need to write the date. This date is when you write the check. So not the date when it'll be paid out, but the date that you're actually writing it. So today's date. Then in this white empty box in numerals, write the number that you're paying. In this case, it's $410. And then be sure to put period 00 for no cents. Then under the pay to the order of line, you'll write it exactly as you see here, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Then below that, you'll write out the amount in words, so spell out 410 and then you'll see this long line. Some people put XX over 100, some people put 00 over 100. Either one is okay, it's just showing that there are no cents on the end of the dollar amount. The for line, or sometimes they put this as a memo line, you can leave this blank, and then be sure to sign your name here. Number 6, you need a copy of your unexpired passport. This is just the ID page. You do not need to send a copy of your visa. If your visa has expired, it's okay. You can still apply for OPT. The only time you need a new visa is if you're outside the US and coming back in. If you're in the US and you're maintaining status, including through an OPT application, then it's all right if your visa has expired. If you've ever had an EAD card in the past, then you should include a copy of that. However, the vast majority of Calvin students will not have a past EAD card. So if you're wondering what this is, or if you have one, then the answer is no, you don't have one. If you do have one, then you should know and include a copy of it with your application. Lastly, if you have a picture ID, such as a driver's license, you can also include that in your application. This isn't required, but if you want to send it, you can. Number 5, you'll see that you need a copy of your I-94. If you Google I-94, it should be the first hit that comes up. On this page, you'll want to go down and click on this option. It's the second from the left, Get Most Recent I-94. And then this is just saying that you are who you claim to be and you're using this legitimately, so you can agree to that. Then enter your information here exactly as it appears on your passport. So whatever your last name is on your passport, your first name exactly as it is on your passport number, and your country of citizenship. Then you click Next, and the first thing that shows up will be your I-94. You do not need the travel history. That you'll be able to see it on the next page, but you don't need to print the travel history. Just print the I-94 itself. Next, we'll discuss the timeline on applying for OPT. It gets a little bit complicated, but we'll walk you through it. So first off, the most important part of this timeline is your program completion date, which you see here. This is not necessarily the same as graduation. Generally, if you're graduating in the spring, then it will be the date of graduation. But if you're graduating in the summer or in the fall, then you might have a slightly different program completion date. The reason that you want to fill out that graduation verification form first with the registrar is because that will tell you exactly when your program completion date will be. The dates when you can actually apply for OPT start no more than 90 days before your program completion date, or no more than 60 days after your program completion date. And what this means is that USCIS will receive your application during these times. If you send them an application more than 90 days before, they will reject the application, and if you send it more than 60 days after, they will also reject the application. So you can still send the Calvin forms in earlier to get the I-20, but don't send anything to USCIS more than 90 days before your program completion date. Even though you can apply up to 60 days after, it's really a good idea to apply as early as possible. The reason is that it can take them between 3 and 5 months to actually approve your OPT, and until it's approved and you've received the EAD card, you cannot start working. So that's the application window from 90 days before the program completion date until 60 days after. Next, you'll see that we have possible start dates marked here. So you can start from 1 day after your program completion date to up to 60 days after your program completion date. The reason that choosing a start date is important is because it affects when you can work. So let's look at these two examples. If we choose as our start date the very day after program completion, then OPT would start immediately. Again, this is only if it's approved. If you choose a start date and it's not approved, then you have to wait until the new start date that they will give you upon approval. So let's say that you ask for the day after program completion, but USCIS is running late, or maybe you made your application late. They will give you a new start date and they will print it on your EAD card, and that will become your new start date. However, assuming that they get it done on time and that you submitted your application nice and early to give them time, then we can use these examples. So if you get the start date of 1 day after your program completion date, then you get your 12 months of OPT, and you reach your end date 12 months later, and then you have the 60-day grace period. But if you choose a later start date and it's approved, then you'll see that during this time you can't work. So you have this gap here, but that can give you extra time to look for jobs or that sort of thing. So as you'll see, if it's approved at a later date or you have a later start date, then you will also have a later end date and your grace period will end later. The grace period is still 60 days in both examples, but you can see that since one starts later, it also ends later. So this leads to the question that many students have of what should they choose as their start date. The general advice is that if you have a job lined up already and you know you want to start right away, then I would recommend choosing the earliest possible start date, because that will give you the opportunity to start working right away as soon as your EAD is approved and you receive it in the mail. If you want more time to look for jobs, then it might be a good idea to choose the latest possible start date. So you might choose right up here at 60 days after your program completion date. This means that you would have 60 days to look for a job, and during those 60 days you would not be accruing unemployment days. Remember that once your OPT is approved and you reach your start date, you can only have 90 days of unemployment before you lose your status. However, if you choose a later start date, then those 60 days between your program completion and your start date will not count as unemployment. The disadvantage of this is that if you do find a job early, say you requested day 60 as your start date, but you get a job offer on day 30, well, you won't be able to start until you reach that start date. So this usually is not a problem. You just have to communicate clearly with potential employers about when you can start. Lastly, a quick note about the grace period here. During these 60 days from your OPT end date until the end of the grace period, you can stay in the US. You can't travel back and forth, so if you depart the US during the grace period, then you're finished and your F1 status is done. You would not be able to return. But you can stay in the US, you can travel around within the US. If you need extra time to pack up, then you can use it for that. Also during this time, if you've been accepted to graduate school, you can transfer your USCIS record. You could also apply for a change of status if you're looking for a new status to remain in the United States. We always recommend that you work with an immigration attorney in those sorts of situations. But if you're just going to grad school, you can transfer your USCIS record during this time. Then you have 5 months after you transfer the record to start classes. You can also transfer your USCIS record at any time during your OPT. It's just that as soon as you transfer the USCIS record, then your OPT ends. Once you have all of your documents finished, then you need to decide how you will submit it to USCIS. So you have two options. One is to mail the physical documents to them. You would send it by tracked mail in the mailroom. The other option is to file online. Filing online is pretty new. It only came out about 1 year ago that they allowed this option, and neither option is really faster than the other necessarily. If you file online, then you don't have to pay for tracked mail, but at the same time, some DSOs think that because so many students file online, it might actually be faster to send tracked mail. I really don't know. It's up to you which one you want to do. If you decide to file online, then you'll need to make a USCIS account. Do this by going to uscis.gov and just search for USCIS account. It should be the first hit that comes up. Then click the Create an Account button, and then follow all of the steps. It does take rather a while to set up an account, so in that case, mailing can be a little bit faster just with the amount of time required for you. However, when it comes to the processing time, there's no known difference between mailing and online. One other thing to keep in mind if you choose to apply online, you do need to have a credit card or a debit card that you can use. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your own. You can borrow one from a friend or a community member and pay them back, but you do have to have that option. You can't pay by check or money order if you file online. If you choose to file by mail and send the physical documents, then you'll need to find the most recent address for the USCIS lockbox. They do change these every once in a while, so it's good to just go to uscis.gov/I-765-addresses. You can also just search I-765, and it'll be like the third one down, direct filing addresses for Form I-765. Or if you're on the I-765 page itself, just go to filing guidance and where to file, and then click on the I-765. So once you're here on the direct filing addresses page, scroll down to foreign students and choose the correct one. I believe usually these are all the same, but again, you are in C3B, so you'll be this one for optional practical training. It's a little bit different depending on whether you use USPS or FedEx, UPS, or DHL. There's just a slight difference. It's going to the same location. If you do file by mail, then you can bring your documents down to the mailing services on campus. That's over on the north side by the Lake Drive entrance. If you just bring everything that you need along with some form of payment, they'll be able to help you send it over. Before you send your application in to USCIS, I'm happy to check the documents for you. I just ask that you please try to complete as much as possible on them, and then send them in with your questions all at the same time. It's okay if we have to go back and forth a few times with multiple questions, but because there are so many students who apply for OPT at the same time, I just ask that you please try to fill out as much as possible and then send in your questions. You can send them to me digitally by email, or you can bring them to my office during office hours, which are posted on the website, or you could also email to make an appointment. After you send your application into USCIS, the first thing you'll get is a receipt notice. This could be sent through the mail or it could be sent digitally depending on how you signed up. Be sure to keep that receipt notice. It's very important if anything happens with your application. And then also in the future, if you apply for any other immigration benefits or decide to return to the US in the future, it's important to keep that. Keep all of the documentation that you receive from USCIS forever. It's just a good guideline. Once you have the receipt notice, you can stay in the US until you get a decision about your OPT. So even if you're past the 60-day application window that we talked about earlier, if you have the receipt and they have not given you a decision about whether they will accept or reject your OPT, you can stay in the US legally until you get that decision. After you get the receipt notice, eventually you will also get an approval notice. This means that your OPT has been approved. However, you can't start working until you have your EAD card and you've reached your start date. So the EAD will come sometime after the approval notice. Sometimes it's just a few days after the approval notice. Sometimes it can be a few weeks even. It just depends on the year. These things vary. When you have your EAD and you've reached your start date, that means that you can start working. Before you start working, be sure to log into the SEVP portal. You will receive an email from SEVP with the prompt to create your SEVP portal account. Be sure to do that as soon as you receive the email because the link is time sensitive. You'll also want to make sure that you remember your password because you might have to log back in to the portal to update your address or to update any changes in your employment. Once you've updated the portal, please email the immigration coordinator to get a new I-20 and then you're all set to start working.